The town of Blackwood stood still. Time seemed to drift by. It was the kind of place where secrets whispered on the wind, and above it all stood Blackwood Manor. The mansion loomed over the town. It was a monument to forgotten grandeur. Its windows, like vacant eyes, stared out at the world. Blackwood Manor had been empty for nearly a century. Generations had passed, yet the stories remained. Locals spoke of strange lights. They heard whispers carried on the wind. The manor was a scar on the landscape. It was a constant reminder of the darkness that lay dormant within. The mansion was more than just an empty building. It was a vessel. Trapped inside were memories, pain, and something more. Something sinister that sent shivers down your spine. It waited. It watched. It was hungry for life to feed its eternal darkness. The story of Blackwood Manor was a tragic one. It was a tale whispered by the fireplace. The Blackwood family, once prominent and respected, met a grim end. Their patriarch, Jonathan Blackwood, was a cruel man. Driven by greed and hunger for power, his wife Eleanor was a woman of grace and kindness. She was a stark contrast to her husband's darkness. One fateful night, a fire engulfed Blackwood Manor. Jonathan perished in the blaze. Eleanor and their young son, William, vanished that night. Over time, stories of the Blackwood family became local legend. The mansion stood as a grim reminder. The wind howled like a banshee. Rain lashed against the windows. Inside a small house on the edge of town, a group of teenagers huddled together. Their faces flickered in the light of a single bulb. They were all drawn together by a dare to spend a night in the haunted Blackwood Manor.
Are you sure about this?
Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. She pulled her jacket tighter around her.
Don't be such a scaredy cat, Em. It's just an old house.
And with that, he headed out the door, the others trailing behind him. But Jake was already pushing open the front door. It creaked open with a groan. The sound echoed through the house, a chorus of whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The teenagers stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind them. They were trapped. The mansion had them in its embrace. S2, this is insane. Let's just go back. The old iron gates creaked open. It was as if the mansion itself was inhaling them into its darkness. The air grew heavy. It was filled with the scent of damp earth and decay. The teenagers made their way up the overgrown path, their hearts pounding in unison with the rhythm of the storm. The mansion loomed before them, more imposing than ever. Its windows were like the eyes of a predator, watching their every move. Lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating the dilapidated facade. They could see the intricate carvings that adorned the rotting wood, now barely recognizable as the once proud symbols of the Blackwood family. The air inside was thick and heavy. Dust motes danced in the faint moonlight that filtered through the grimy windows. The teenagers took a step back. Their eyes struggled to adjust to the gloom. Cobwebs hung from every corner, and the stench of decay filled their nostrils. The silence was broken only by the sound of their own breathing and the pounding of their hearts. They explored the mansion's decaying grandeur with a mixture of curiosity and fear. They wandered through darkened hallways. They peeked into dusty rooms, each one seemingly frozen in time. It was as if the Blackwood family had simply vanished, leaving their belongings behind.
Gasp! Look, over there!
She pointed to the end of the hallway. A figure stood there, shrouded in shadow. It was a woman in a flowing white gown. Her face was obscured by the darkness. The figure turned, and for a fleeting moment they saw her face. It was a mask of sorrow. Her eyes filled with an unspeakable sadness. Then she vanished into thin air. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the teenagers. They stumbled back, their blood turning to ice in their veins. They had to get out of there, now! They ran back towards the front door, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if an unseen hand held it shut. Chris yelled, his voice cracking with panic. They rattled the doorknob, kicked at the heavy wood, but it was no use. The door remained firmly shut. They were trapped within the mansion's grasp. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room. The teenagers froze. They saw it, scratched into the wooden surface of the door, barely visible in the flickering light, were words. "There is no escape from the darkness. S3, we're trapped."
You should not be here. This is my home. Narrator. Panic set in. They were trapped. They were at the mercy of whatever evil lurked within the mansion's walls. They huddled together for comfort, their breaths coming in short, sharp gasps. Then a voice, cold and hollow, echoed through the mansion.
The teenagers spun around, their eyes searching the darkness. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Jake called out, his voice trembling. A cold wind swept through the mansion, extinguishing their only source of light. They were plunged into absolute darkness. They could hear the sound of their own terrified breathing. They could hear the beating of their own hearts. The voice spoke again, closer this time. S1, who's there?
I am Jonathan Blackwood, and this mansion is my prison. You will join me in my eternal torment.
The teenagers huddled together, their fear palpable. They were trapped with a vengeful spirit in a house that seemed to pulse with malevolence. They were like mice caught in a spider's web, struggling against the inevitable. The others looked at her, a flicker of hope igniting in their eyes. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. They had to try. S4. Suddenly Jessica gasped. "The lady in white," she whispered. "She might be able to help us."
But how do we find her? Chris asked, his voice barely a whisper.
Jessica closed her eyes, trying to remember the sorrow she had seen in the ghostly woman's eyes. "We need to help her," she said. "We need to find out what she needs."
They fanned out, searching for clues. They knew time was running out. Jonathan Blackwood was growing stronger, his presence suffocating them like a shroud. Hours crawled by. The storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil within the mansion. The teenagers searched desperately for any sign of the lady in white or a way to break the curse that held Jonathan Blackwood captive. They found a hidden room. It was tucked away at the end of a narrow corridor. Inside, they discovered a diary. It belonged to Eleanor Blackwood. Its pages were filled with her elegant script, a stark contrast to the horrors they were experiencing. As they read, they uncovered the truth. Jonathan Blackwood had become consumed by his own darkness. He had driven his wife to despair. In a moment of desperation, she had set fire to the mansion, hoping to end his reign of terror. But Jonathan had escaped the flames. He had perished in the fire, but his spirit remained trapped. He was bound to the mansion by his own rage and the curse he had brought upon himself. The teenagers knew what they had to do. They had to help Jonathan Blackwood find peace. They had to release him from the chains of his own making. Only then could they break the curse that held them all captive. They found Jonathan Blackwood in the mansion's grand ballroom. He swirled in the center of the room, a vortex of rage and despair. The room was ice-cold, the air thick with the stench of decay.
You cannot escape me, Jonathan's voice boomed, shaking the very foundation of the mansion. You will join me in my torment.
But the teenagers stood their ground. They had faced their fears. They had uncovered the truth. They knew that Jonathan Blackwood was not a monster to be feared, but a soul to be pitied.
"Jonathan," Jessica said, her voice strong and clear, "we know what happened. We know your pain. It's time to let go. Find peace. Forgive yourself."
The vortex of energy that was Jonathan Blackwood hesitated, its swirling energy faltering. For a moment, the teenagers saw a flicker of humanity in the heart of the storm, and then, slowly, the energy began to dissipate. The temperature in the room rose, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. The shadows that had clung to the mansion for so long began to recede, like mist burning away in the morning sun. Jonathan Blackwood was gone. The curse was broken. As dawn broke, the teenagers emerged from the mansion. They were battered, bruised, but alive. They had faced their fears. They had stared into the abyss and emerged victorious. The mansion stood on the hill, bathed in the golden light of the rising sun. It no longer seemed menacing, but merely old and tired. The haunting presence was gone, replaced by a sense of peace. The teenagers had set the spirits of Blackwood Manor free, including their own.